Section 0 of How They Succeeded. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. How They Succeeded by Orison Swett Marden. Introductory note. The great interest manifested in the life stories of successful men and women, which have been published from time to time in the magazine Success, has actuated their production in book form. Many of these sketches have been revised and rewritten, and new ones have been added. They all contain the elements that make men and women successful, and they are intended to show that character, energy, and an indomitable ambition will succeed in the world, and that in this land, where all men are born equal and have an equal chance in life, there is no reason for despair. I believe that the ideal book for youth should deal with concrete examples, for that which is taken from real life is far more effective than that which is culled from fancy. Character building, its uplifting, energizing force, has been made the basic principle of this work. To all who have aided me, I express a grateful acknowledgement, and to none more than those whose life stories are here related as a lesson to young people. Among those who have given me special assistance in securing those life stories are Mr. Harry Steele Morrison, Mr. J. Herbert Welch, Mr. Charles H. Garrett, Mr. Henry Irving Dodge, and Mr. Jesse W. Wyke. I am confident that the remarkable exhibit of the successful careers made in this book, careers based on sound business principles and honesty, will meet with appreciation on the part of the reading public. Orison Swett Marden. End of Section 0.
Chapter 1 of How They Succeeded. How They Succeeded by Orison Swett Marden. Marshall Field. This world-renowned merchant is not easily accessible to interviews, and he seeks no fame for his business achievements. Yet there is no story more significant, none more full of encouragement and inspiration for youth. In relating it as he told it, I have removed my own interrogations so far as possible from the interview. I was born in Conway, Massachusetts, he said, in 1835. My father's farm was among the rocks and hills of that section, and not very fertile. All the people were poor in those days. My father was a man who had a good judgment, and he made a success out of the farming business. My mother was of a more intellectual bent. Both my parents were anxious that their boys should amount to something in life, and their interest and care helped me. I had but few books, scarcely any to speak of. There was not much time for literature. Such books as we had I made use of. I had a leaning towards business, and took up with it as early as possible. I was naturally of a saving disposition. I had to be. Those were saving times. $1 looked very big to us boys in those days, and as we had a difficult labor in earning it, we did not quickly spend it. I, however, determined not to remain poor. Did you attend both school and college? I attended the common and high schools at home, but not long. I had no college training. Indeed, I cannot say that I had much of any public school education. I left home when 17 years of age, and of course had not time to study closely. My first venture in trade was made as clerk in a country store at Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where everything was sold, including dry goods. There I remained for 4 years, and picked up my first knowledge of business. I saved my earnings and attended strictly to business, and so made those 4 years valuable to me. Before I went west, my employer offered me a quarter interest in his business if I would remain with him. Even after I had been here several years, he wrote and offered me a third interest if I would go back. But I was already too well placed. I was always interested in the commercial side of life. To this I bent my energies, and I always thought I would be a merchant. In Chicago, I entered as a clerk in the dry goods house of Cooley, Wordsworth and Company in South Water Street. There was no guarantee at that time that this place would ever become the Western metropolis. The town had plenty of ambition and pluck, but the possibilities of greatness were hardly visible. It is interesting to note, in this connection, how closely the story of Mr. Field's progress is connected with Chicago's marvelous growth. The city itself, in its relations to the West, was an opportunity. A parallel, almost exact, may be drawn between the individual career and the growth of the town. Chicago was organized in 1837, 2 years after Mr. Field was born in the far-off farm in New England, and the place then had a population of a little more than 4,000. In 1856, when Mr. Field, fully equipped for a successful mercantile career, became a resident of the future metropolis of the West, the population had grown to little more than 84,000. Mr. Field's prosperity advanced with the growth of the city. With Chicago, he was stricken but not crushed by the Great Fire of 1871, and with Chicago, he advanced again to higher achievement and far greater prosperity than before the calamity. What were your equipments for success when you started as a clerk here in Chicago in 1856? Health and ambition, and what I believe to be sound principles, answered Mr. Field. And here I found that in a growing town, no one had to wait for promotion. Good business qualities were promptly discovered, and men were pushed forward rapidly. After 4 years, in 1860, I was made a partner, and in 1865 there was a partial reorganization, and the firm consisted after that of Mr. Leiter, Mr. Palmer, and myself, Field, Palmer, and Leiter. 2 years later, Mr. Palmer withdrew, and until 1881, the style of the firm was Field, Leiter and Company. Mr. Leiter retired in that year, and since then it has been as at present, Marshall, Field and Company. What contributed most to the great growth of your business? I asked. To answer that question, said Mr. Field, would be to review the condition of the West from the time Chicago began until the fire in 1871. Everything was coming this way: immigration, railways, and water traffic, and Chicago was enjoying flush times. There were things to learn about the country, and the man who learned the quickest fared the best. For instance, the comparative newness of rural communities and settlements made a knowledge of a local solvency impossible. The old state banking system prevailed, and speculation of every kind was rampant. A cash basis. The panic of 1857 swept almost everything away except the house I worked for, and I learned the reason they survived was because they understood the nature of the new country and did a cash business. That is, they bought for cash and sold on 30 and 60 days, instead of giving the customers, whose financial condition you could hardly tell anything about, all the time they wanted. When the panic came, they had no debts and little owing to them, and so they weathered it all right. I learned what I consider my best lesson, and that was to do a cash business. What were some of the principles you applied to your business? I questioned. I made it a point that all goods should be exactly what they were represented to be. It was a rule of the house that an exact scrutiny of the quality of all goods purchased should be maintained, and that nothing was to induce the house to place upon the market any line of goods at a shade of variation from their real value. Every article sold must be regarded as wanted, and every purchaser must be enabled to feel secure. Did you suffer any losses or reverses during your career? No loss, except by the fire of 1871. It swept away everything, about 3.5 millions. We were, of course, protected by insurance, which would have been sufficient against any ordinary calamity of the kind. But the disaster was so sweeping that some of the companies which had insured our property were blotted out, and a long time passed before our claims against others were settled. We managed, however, to start again. There were no buildings of brick or stone left standing, But there were some great shells of horse-car barns in State and 20th Streets which were not burned, and I hired those. We put up signs announcing that we would continue business uninterruptedly, and then rush the work of fitting things up and getting in stock. Did the panic of 1873 affect your business? Not at all. We did not have any debts. May I ask, Mr. Fields, what you consider to have been the turning point in your career, the point after which there was no more danger? Saving the first $5,000 I ever had, when I might just as well have spent the moderate salary I made. Possession of that sum, once I had it, gave me the ability to meet opportunities. That I consider the turning point. What trait of character do you look upon as having been the most essential in your career? Perseverance, said Mr. Field. But Mr. Selfridge, his most trusted lieutenant, in whose private office we were, insisted upon the addition of good judgment to this. If I am compelled to lay claim to such traits, added Mr. Fields, it is because I have tried to practice them, and the trying has availed me much. I have tried to make all my acts and commercial moves the result of definite consideration and sound judgment. There never were any great ventures or risks. I practiced honest, slow-going business methods, and tried to back them with energy and a good system. At this point, in answer to further questions, Mr. Field disclaimed having overworked in his business, although after the fire of '71 he worked about 18 hours a day for several weeks. My fortune, however, has not been made in that manner. I believe in reasonable hours, but a close attention during those hours. I never worked very many hours a day. People do not work as many hours now as they once did. The day's labor has shortened in the last 20 years for everyone. Qualities that make for success. What, Mr. Field, I said, do you consider to be the first requisite for success in life, so far as the young beginner is concerned? The qualities of honesty, energy, frugality, integrity are more necessary than ever today, and there is no success without them. They are so often urged that they have become commonplace, but they are really more prized than ever, and any good fortune that comes by such methods is deserved and admirable. A college education and business. Do you believe a college education for the young man to be a necessity in the future? Not for business purposes. Better training will become more and more a necessity. The truth is, with most young men, a college education means that just at the time when they should be having business principles instilled into them, and to be getting themselves energetically pulled together for their life's work, they are sent to college. Then intervenes what many a young man looks back on as the jolliest time of his life, 4 years of college. Often, when he comes out of college, the young man is unfitted by this good time to buckle down to hard work, and the result is a failure to grasp opportunities that would have opened the way for a successful career. As to retiring from business, Mr. Field remarked, I do not believe that, when a man no longer tends to his private business in person every day, he has given up interest in affairs. He may be, in fact should be, doing wider and greater work. There certainly is no pleasure in idleness. A man, upon giving up business, does not cease laboring, but really does or should do more in a larger sense. He should interest himself in public affairs. There is no happiness in mere dollars. After they are acquired, no one can use but a moderate amount. It is given a man to eat so much, to wear so much, to have so much shelter, and more he cannot use. When money has supplied these, its mission, so far as the individual is concerned, is fulfilled. A man must look further and higher. It is only in the wider public affairs, where money is a moving force toward the general welfare, that the possessor of it can possibly find pleasure, and that only in constantly doing more. What, I said, in your estimation, is the greatest good a man can do? The greatest good he can do is to cultivate himself, develop his powers, in order that he may be of greater use to humanity. End of Chapter 1.
Chapter 2 of How They Succeeded. How They Succeeded by Orison Swett Marden. Bell Telephone Talk. Hints on Success by Alexander G. Bell. Extremely polite, always anxious to render courtesy, no one carries great success more gracefully than Alexander G. Bell, the inventor of the telephone. His graciousness has won many a friend, the admiration of many more, and has smoothed many a rugged spot in life. A night worker. When I first went to see him, it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, and he was in bed. The second time, I thought I would go somewhat later, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He was eating his breakfast, I was told, and I had to wait some time. He came in apologizing profusely for keeping me waiting. When I told him I had come to interview him, in behalf of young people, about success, its underlying principles, he threw back his large head and laughingly said, "Nothing succeeds like success." "Success, did you say? Why, that is a big subject. Too big a one. You must give me time to think about it, and you, having planted the seed in my brain, will have to wait for me." When I asked what time I should call, he said, "Come any time, if it is only late. I begin my work at about 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, and continue until 4 or 5 in the morning. Night is a more quiet time to work. It aids thought." So, when I went to see him again, I made it a point to be late. He cordially invited me into his studio, where, as we both sat on a large and comfortable sofa, he talked long on the subject of success. The value of this article would be greatly enhanced if I could add his charming manner of emphasizing what he says, with hands, head, and eyes, and if I could add his beautiful distinctness of speech, due a great deal to his having given instruction to deaf mutes, who must read the lips. "What do you think are the factors of success?" I asked. The reply was prompt and to the point. Perseverance applied to a practical end. Perseverance is the chief, but perseverance must have some practical end, or it does not avail the man possessing it. A person without a practical end in view becomes a crank or an idiot. Such persons fill our insane asylums. The same perseverance that they show in some idiotic idea, if exercised in the accomplishment of something practicable, would no doubt bring success. Perseverance is first, but practicability is chief. The success of the Americans as a nation is due to their great practicability. But often what the world calls nonsensical becomes practical, does it not? You were called crazy too once, were you not? There are some things, though, that are always impracticable. Now, take, for instance, this idea of perpetual motion. Scientists have proved that it is impossible, yet our patent office is continually beset by people applying for inventions on some perpetual motion machine. So the department has adopted a rule whereby a working model is always required of such applicants. They cannot furnish one. The impossible is incapable of success. I have heard of people dreaming inventions. That is not at all impossible. I am a believer in unconscious cerebration. The brain is working all the time. though we do not know it. At night, it follows up what we think in the daytime. When I have worked a long time on one thing, I make it a point to bring all the facts regarding it together before I retire, and I have often been surprised at the results. Have you not noticed that, often, what was dark and perplexing to you the night before is found to be perfectly solved the next morning? We are thinking all the time. It is impossible not to think. Can everyone become an inventor? Oh no, not all minds are constituted alike. Some minds are only adapted to certain things. But as one's mind grows, and one's knowledge of the world's industries widens, it adapts itself to such things as naturally fall to it. Upon my asking the relation of health to success, the professor replied, I believe it to be a primary principle of success. Mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind in a sound body. The mind in a weak body produces weak ideas. A strong body gives strength to the thought of the mind. Ill health is due to man's artificiality of living. He lives indoors. He becomes, as it were, a hothouse plant. Such a plant is never as successful as a hardy garden plant is. An outdoor life is necessary to health and success, especially in a youth. But is not hard study often necessary to success? No, decidedly not. You cannot force ideas. Successful ideas are the result of slow growth. Ideas do not reach perfection in a day, no matter how much study is put upon them. It is perseverance in the pursuit of studies that is really wanted. Concentration of purpose. Next must come concentration of purpose and study. That is another thing I mean to emphasize. Concentrate all your thought upon the work in hand. The sun's rays do not burn until brought to a focus. I am now thinking about flying machines. Everything in regard to them I pick out and read. When I see a bird flying in the air, I note its manner of flight, as I would not if I were not constantly thinking about artificial flight and concentrating all my thought and observation upon it. It is like a man who has made the acquaintance of some new word that has been brought forcibly to his notice, although he may have come across it many times before and not noticed it particularly. Man is the result of slow growth. That is why he occupies the position he does in animal life. What does a pup amount to that has gained its growth in a few days or weeks, beside a man who only attains it in as many years? A horse is often a grandfather before a boy has attained his full maturity. The most successful men in the end are those whose success is the result of steady accretion. That intellectuality is more vigorous, that has attained its strength gradually. It is the man who carefully advances step by step, with his mind becoming wider and wider, and progressively better able to grasp any theme or situation, persevering in what he knows to be practical, and concentrating his thought upon it, who is bound to succeed to the greatest degree. Young American geese. If a man is not bound down, he is sure to succeed. He may be bound down by environment or by doting parental petting. In Paris, they fatten geese to create a diseased condition of the liver. A man stands with a box of very finely prepared and very rich food beside a revolving stand, and as it revolves, one goose after another passes before him. Taking the first goose by the neck, he clamps down its throat a large lump of the food, whether the goose will or no, until its crop is well stuffed out, and then he proceeds with the rest in the same very mechanical manner. Now, I think, If those geese had to work hard for their own food, they would digest it better and be far healthier geese. How many young American geese are stuffed in about the same manner at college and at home by their rich and fond parents? Unhelpful reading. Did everything you ever studied help you to attain success? On the contrary, I did not begin real study until I was over 16. Until that time, my principal study was reading novels. He laughed heartily at my evident astonishment. They did not help me in the least, for they did not give me an insight into real life. It is only those things that give one a grasp of practical affairs that are helpful. To read novels continuously is like reading fairy stories or Arabian Nights tales. It is a butterfly existence, so long as it lasts. But someday, one is called to stern reality, unprepared. Inventions in America. You have had experience in life in Europe and in America. Do you think the chances for success are the same in Europe as in America? It is harder to attain success in Europe. There is hardly the same appreciation of progress there as here. Appreciation is an element of success. Encouragement is needed. My thoughts run mostly toward inventions. In England, people are conservative. They are well contented with the old, and do not readily adopt new ideas. Americans more quickly appreciate new inventions. Take an invention to an Englishman or a Scot, and he will ask you all about it, and then say your invention may be all right, but let somebody else try it first. Take the same invention to an American, and if it is intelligently explained, he is generally quick to see the feasibility of it. America is an inspiration to inventors. It is quicker to adopt advanced ideas than England or Europe. The most valuable inventions of this century have been made in America. The Orient. Do you think there is a chance for Americans in the Orient? There is only a chance for capital and trade. American labor cannot compete with Japanese and Chinese. A Japanese coolie, for the hardest kind of work, receives the equivalent of 6 cents a day, and the whole family, father, mother, and children, work and contribute to the common good. A foreigner is only made use of until they have absorbed all his useful ideas. Then he is avoided. The Japanese are ahead of us in many things. Environment and heredity. Do you think environment and heredity count in success? Environment, certainly. Heredity, not so distinctly. In heredity, a man may stamp out the thoughts he has inherited. There is no chance for the proper working of heredity. If selection could be carried out, a man might owe much to heredity. But as it is, only opposites marry. Blonde and light-complexioned people marry brunettes, and the tall marry the short. In our scientific societies, men only are admitted. If women who are interested especially in any science were allowed to affiliate with the men in these societies, we might hope to see some wonderful workings of the laws of heredity. A man, as a general rule, owes very little to what he is born with. A man is what he makes of himself. Environment counts for a great deal. A man's particular idea may have no chance for growth or encouragement in his community. Real success is denied that man until he finds a proper environment. America is a good environment for young men. It breathes the very spirit of success. I noticed at once, when I first came to this country, how the people were all striving for success. and helping others to attain success. It is an inspiration you cannot help feeling. America is the land of success. Professor Bell's life story. Alexander Graham Bell was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, March 3, 1847. His father, Alexander Melville Bell, now in Washington, D.C., was a distinguished Scottish educator and the inventor of a system of visible speech, which he has successfully taught to deaf mutes. His grandfather, Alexander Bell, became well known by the invention of a method of removing impediments of speech. The younger Bell received his education at the Edinburgh High School and University, and in 1867 he entered the University of London. Then, in his 23rd year, his health failing from overstudy, he came with his father to Canada, as he expressed it, to die. Later he settled in the United States, becoming first a teacher of deaf mutes and subsequently professor of vocal physiology in Boston University. In 1867, he first began to study the problem of conveying articulate sound by electric currents, which he pursued during his leisure time. After 9 long years of research and experiment, he completed the first telephone, early in 1876, when it was exhibited at the Centennial Exposition, and pronounced the wonder of wonders in electric telegraphy. This was the judgment of scientific men who were in a position to judge, and not of the world at large. People regarded it only as a novelty, as a curious scientific toy, and most businessmen doubted that it would ever prove a useful factor in the daily life of the world, and the untold blessing to mankind it has since become. All this skepticism he had to overcome. A new art was to be taught to the world, a new industry created, business and social methods revolutionized. I will make the world hear it. It does speak, cried Sir William Thomson with fervid enthusiasm, and Bell's father-in-law added, I will make the world hear it. In less than a quarter of a century, it is conveying thought in every civilized tongue, Japan being the first country outside of the United States to adopt it. In the first 8 years of its existence, the Bell Telephone Company declared dividends to the extent of $4 million, and the great sums of money the company earns for its stockholders is a subject of current comment and wonder. Some fierce contests have been waged over the priority of his invention, but Mr. Bell has been triumphant in every case. He has become very wealthy from his invention. He has a beautiful winter residence in Washington, fitted up with a laboratory and all sorts of electrical conveniences, mostly of his own invention. His summer residence is at Cambridge, Massachusetts. His wife Mabel, the daughter of the late Gardner G. Hubbard, is a deaf mute, of whose education he had charge when she was a child. Mr. Bell, with one of his beautiful daughters, recently made a visit to Japan. The Order of the Rising Star, the highest order in the gift of the Japanese Emperor, was bestowed upon him. He is greatly impressed by the character of the people, believing them capable of much greater advancement. Mr. Bell is the inventor of the photophone, aiming to transmit speech by a vibratory beam of light. He has given much time and study to problems of multiplex telegraphy, and to efforts to record speech by photographing the vibrations of a jet of water. Few inventors have derived as much satisfaction and happiness from their achievements as Mr. Bell. In this respect, his success has been ideal, and in impressive contrast with the experience of Charles Goodyear, the man who made India rubber useful, and of some other well-known inventors, whose services to mankind brought no substantial reward to themselves. Mr. Bell is in no wise spoiled by his good fortune, but is the same unpretending person today that he was before the telephone made him wealthy and famous. End of Chapter 2.
Chapter 3. Of How They Succeeded. How They Succeeded by Orison Swett Marden. Why the American People Like Helen Gould. Miss Helen Gould has won a place for herself in the hearts of Americans such as few people of great wealth ever gain. Her strong character, common sense, and high ideals have made her respected by all, while her munificence and kindness have won for her the love of many. Upon my arrival at her Tarrytown home, I was made to feel that I was welcome, and everyone who enters her presence feels the same. The grand mansion, standing high on the hills overlooking the Hudson, has a home-like appearance. Chickens play round the little stone cottage at the grand entrance, and the grounds are not unlike those of any other country house, with trees in abundance and beautiful lawns. There are large beds of flowers, and in the gardens all the summer vegetables were growing. Miss Gould takes a very great interest in her famous greenhouses, the gardens, the flowers, and the chickens, for she is a home-loving woman. It is a common thing to see her in the grounds, digging and raking and planting, like some farmer's girl. That is one reason why her neighbours all like her. She seems so unconscious of her wealth and station. A face full of character. When I entered Lyndhurst, she came forward to meet me in the pleasantest way imaginable. Her face is not exactly beautiful, but has a great deal of character written upon it, and it is very attractive. She held out her hand for me to shake in the good old-fashioned way, and then we sat down in the wide hall to talk. Miss Gould was dressed very simply. Her gown was of dark cloth, close-fitting, and her skirt hung several inches above the ground, for she is a believer in short skirts for walking. Her entire costume was very becoming. She never overdresses, and her garments are neat and naturally of excellent quality. Her ambitions and aims. In the conversation that followed, I was permitted to learn much of her ambitions and aims. She is ambitious to leave an impression on the world by good deeds well done, and this ambition is gratified to the utmost. She is modest about her work. "I cannot find that I am doing much at all," she said, "when there is so very much to be done. I suppose I shouldn't expect to be able to do everything, but I sometimes feel that I want to, nevertheless." A most charming charity. One of her most charming charities is Woody Crest, 2 miles from Lyndhurst, a haven of delight where some 20 waifs are received at a time for a 2 weeks' visit. Years before Miss Gould's name became associated throughout the country with charity, she was doing her part in trying to make a world happier. Every summer she was hostess to scores of poor children who were guests at one of the 2 Gould summer homes. Little people with pinched, wan faces and crippled children from the tenements were taken to that home and entertained. They came in relays, a new company arriving once in 2 weeks, the number of children thus given a taste of heaven on earth being limited only by the capacity of the Gould residents. This was her first, and, I am told, her favourite charity. Little children do things naturally. It was when a child that Helen Gould commenced the work that has given her name a sacred significance. When a little girl, she could see the less fortunate little girls passing the great Gould home on Fifth Avenue, and she pitied them and loved them, and from her own allowance administered to their comfort. "My father always encouraged me in charitable work," she writes a friend. How much the American people owe to that encouragement! A frown from that father, idolized as he was by his daughter, would have frosted and killed that budding philanthropy which has made a great fortune a fountain of joy and carried sunshine into many lives. Woody Crest is a sylvan paradise, a nobly wooded hill towering above the sumptuous green of Westchester, a place with wild flowers and winding drives, and at its crest a solid mansion built of the native rock. One can look out from its luxuriant lawns to the majestic Hudson, or turn aside into the shadiest of nooks among the trees. What a place for the restful breezes to fan the tired brows from the tenements! Do the little folks enjoy it? Ask them, and their eyes will sparkle with gladness for answer. Ask those, too, who are awaiting their turn in hot New York, and watch the eagerness of their anticipation. For 2 long and happy weeks they become as joyous as mortals are ever permitted to be. Miss Gould has a personal oversight of the place, and by her frequent visits makes friends with the wee visitors, who look upon her as a combination of angel and fairy godmother. Every day a wagonette drawn by 2 horses takes the children, in relays, for long drives into the country. Amusements are provided, and some of those who remain for an entire season at Woody Crest are instructed in different branches. Twice a month some of the older boys set the type for a little magazine which is devoted to Woody Crest matters. There are several portable cottages erected there, one for the sick, one for servants' sleeping rooms, and a third for a laundry. And the munificent hostess of these children of the needy gets her rewards in eyes made bright, in cheeks made ruddy, in the "God bless you" that falls from the lips of grateful parents. All winter long, instead of closing Woody Crest and waiting for the summer sunshine to bring about a return of her charitable opportunities, Miss Gould has kept the place running at full expense. During the winter she herself occupies her town residence. Ordinarily she would not keep Woody Crest open longer than Thanksgiving Day, but in the past winter 15 small boys were entertained for 6 months. 6 of these were cripples, and 9 were sound of limb. Though it required many servants, I am told that the little guests were given as much consideration as the same number of grown people would have received. They had nurses and physicians for those who needed them, governesses and instructors for those who were well. A practical sympathy for the less favoured. When, one day, I was privileged to meet Miss Gould at Woody Crest, I saw 100 children scattered around the lawn in front of the stately mansion. It had been an afternoon of labour and anxiety on her part, for she felt the responsibility of entertaining and caring for so many little ones. As she finally cooled herself on the piazza and looked at her little charges romping around on the lawn, I asked her if she thought any of the little ones before her would ever make their mark in the world. "That's hard to say," she replied after a moment's hesitation, "but no one can tell what may be in children until they have grown up and developed. But the hardest thing to me is to see genius struggling under obstacles and in surroundings that would discourage almost anybody. I do not see, for my part, how any child from the poorest tenements could ever grow up and develop into strong, successful men or women. Many of them, of course, have no gifts or endowments to do this, but even if they had, the surroundings are enough to stifle every spark of ambition in them. It is a mystery to me how they can preserve such bright and eager faces. What would we do if we were brought up in such environments? I know I should never be able to survive it, and would never succeed in rising above my surroundings. And it is harder on the girls than the boys. The boys can go forth into the world and probably secure a position which in time will bring them different companionship and surroundings. But the poor girls have so few opportunities. They must drudge and drag along for the bare necessities of life. My heart aches sometimes for them, and I wish I had the power to lighten the burdens of everyone. The hardest thing, I suppose, is to see real ability fighting against odds, with no one to help and encourage. Yes, that seems the worst, and I think we all ought to make it possible for such ones to get a little encouragement and help. When a boy is deserving of credit, it should be given unstintedly. It goes a long way toward making him more hopeful for the future. We don't as a rule receive enough encouragement in this world, certainly not the poor. Everybody seems so busy and intent upon making his own way in the world that he forgets to drop a word of cheer for those who have not been so fortunate by birth or surroundings. Note: for 4 paragraphs preceding, I am indebted to George Ethelbert Walsh, whose interview was published in the Boston Transcript, October the 12th, 1900. For a number of years, Miss Gould has supported certain beds in the babies' shelter in connection with the Church of the Holy Communion, New York, and the Wayside Day Nursery near Bellevue Hospital has always found in her a good friend. Once a year she makes a tour through the day nurseries of New York, noting the special needs of each, and often sending money or materials for meeting those needs. Personal attention to an unselfish service. Her charities, says Mr. Walsh in the article above cited, are probably the most practical on record. She does not go slumming, as so many fashionable girls do, but she does go and investigate personal charities herself and apply the medicine as she thinks best. She puts herself out in more ways to relieve distress around than she would to accommodate her wealthiest friend. Not only has she always pitied the sufferers in the world less fortunate than herself, but she has always had a great desire to help those struggling for a living in practical ways to get along. It is this side of her noble work that stands out most conspicuously today. The public realizes for the first time that this young woman, who first came into actual fame at the time of our war with Spain, has been supporting and encouraging young people in different parts of the country for years past. These protégés are all worthy of her patronage, and they have been sought out by her. Not one has ever approached Miss Gould for help, and in fact such an introduction would undoubtedly operate against her inclination to help them. She has discovered them, and then, through considerable tact and discretion, obtained from them their ambitious desires and hopes. Through equally good tact and sense, she has then placed them in positions where they could work out their own destinies without feeling that they were accepting charity. This is distinctly what Miss Gould wishes to avoid in helping her little protégés. She does not offer them charity, or do anything to make them dependent upon her, if it can be helped. By her money and influence she obtains for them positions which will give them every chance in the world to rise and develop talents which she thinks she has discovered in them. Some of her protégés, continues Mr. Walsh, have been sent away to schools and colleges. One of the easiest ways to accomplish this is to offer a scholarship in some institution, and then place her young protégé in such a position that he or she can win it, and in this way have 4 years of tuition free. Fully a dozen different scholars are now enjoying the benefits of Miss Gould's kindness in this and other respects. 4 others have been enabled to attend art schools, and 2 are studying music under the best teachers through the instrumentality of this young woman. 2 of these scholars were literally rescued from the tenement dregs of New York, and they showed such aptitude for study and work that Miss Gould undertook to give them a fair start in the world. Unusual aptitude, brightness, or kindness on the part of children always attract Miss Gould, and she has become the patron saint of more than 100. When her name is mentioned, they show their interest and concern not by looks of awe and fear, but of eagerness and happiness. Those of their number who have been lifted from their low estate and put in high positions to carve out a life of success through their common patron saint, bring back stories of her kindness and consideration that make the children look upon her as they would the Madonna. But she is a youthful Madonna, and the very idea of posing as such, even before the poor and ignorant of her little friends, would amuse her. Nevertheless, that is the nearest that one can interpret their ideas concerning her. Miss Gould's beneficiaries have been sometimes aided in obtaining the most advanced schooling in the land, and she visits with equal interest the industrial classes of Berea and the favoured students of the College Beautiful. Her views upon education. Miss Gould is well educated and a graduate of a law school. I tried to ascertain her views regarding the education of young women of today and what careers they should follow. This is one of her particular hobbies, and many other young girls she has helped to attain to a better and more satisfactory life. "I believe most earnestly in education for women," she said. "Not necessarily the higher education about which we hear so much, but a good common school education. As the years pass, girls are obliged to make their own way in the world more and more, and to do so they must have good schooling." "And what particular career do you think most desirable for young women?" "Oh, as to careers, there are many that young women follow nowadays. I think if I had my own way to make, I should fit myself to be a private secretary. That is a position which attracts nearly every young woman, but to fill it, she must study hard and learn, and then work hard to keep the place. Then there are openings for young women in the fields of legitimate business. Women know as much about money affairs as men, only most of them have not had much experience. In that field there are hundreds of things that a woman can do." The evil of idleness. But I don't think it matters much what a girl does so long as she is active and doesn't allow herself to stagnate. There is nothing, to my mind, so pathetic as a girl who thinks she can't do anything and is of no use to the world. Her patriotism. The late Admiral Phillip, he of the Texas in the Santiago fight, regarded Miss Gould as an angel, and the sailors of the Brooklyn Navy Yard fairly worship her. A hustling YMCA chap, Frank Smith by name, started a little clubhouse for Jack Ashore near the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Miss Gould heard of this club and visited it. At a glance she grasped the meaning, and on her return home she wrote a letter and a cheque for $50,000, and there sprang from that letter and cheque a handsome building in which there are 60 beds, a library, a pipe organ, a smoking room, and a restaurant. Do you wonder that the Jackies adore her, and that the gale that sweeps over the ship out in the open sea is often freighted with the melody of her name? "When I visited Cuba and Puerto Rico," says Congressman Charles B. Landis of Indiana, to whom I am greatly indebted in preparing this article, "I talked with officers and privates everywhere along the journey, visited camps and hospitals in cities and isolated towns, and everywhere it seemed that the sickness and suffering and heart yearning of the American soldier had been anticipated by Helen Gould. Voices that quivered and eyes that moistened at the mention of the name of this young American girl were one continuous tribute to her heart and work. She cannot fully realize how far-reaching have been her efforts. A businessman looks for results. What impressed me most with Miss Gould's work was the visible, tangible results. Every dollar spent by her seemed to go, straight as a cannonball, to some mark. Miss Gould has a business head and is not hysterical in her work. She gives, but follows the gift and sees that it goes to the spot. She has studied results and knows which charity pays a premium in smiles and tears and joy and better life, and very little of her money will be wasted in impracticable schemes. She has a happy faculty of getting in actual touch with conditions, realizing that she cannot hit an object near at hand by aiming at a star. Miss Gould's practical business sense was beautifully exemplified at Montauk Point. Hundreds of soldiers from the hospitals in Cuba and Puerto Rico were suddenly unloaded there. Elsewhere were government supplies, tents and cots and rations, but there the sick soldiers were without shelter, were hungry, had no medicine, and were sleeping on the ground. Why? Because of red tape. This young lady appeared in person and amazed the strutters in shoulder straps and the slaves to discipline by having the sick soldier boys made comfortable on army cots, placed in army tents, and fed on army rations, and this too without any requisition. She grasped a situation, cut the ropes of theory, and introduced practice. From her own purse she provided nurses and dainties, and bundled up scores of soldier boys and sent them to her beautiful villa on the Hudson. The camp rang with this refrain: "You are the angel of the camp, Helen Gould, in the sun rays in the damp, on the weary, weary tramp, to our darkness you're a lamp, Helen Gould. Thoughts of home and gentle things, Helen Gould, to the camp your coming brings, all the place with music rings at the rustle of your wings, Helen Gould." Our Helen. On the day of the Dewey Parade in New York, Miss Gould was in front of her house, on a platform she had erected for the small children of certain asylums. Mayor Van Wyck told Admiral Dewey who she was, and the Admiral stood up in his carriage and bowed to her 3 times. Then the word went down the line that Miss Gould was there, and every company saluted her as it passed. But it was when a body of young recruits stopped for a moment before her door that the real excitement began. "She shan't marry a foreign prince," they cried, tossing their hats and stamping their feet. "She's Helen, our Helen, and she shall not marry a foreign prince." America. Miss Gould's patriotism is very real and intense, and is not confined to times of war. 2 years ago, she caused 50,000 copies of the national hymn, America, to be printed and distributed among the pupils of the public schools of New York. "I believe everyone should know that hymn and sing it," she declared, "if he sings no other. I would like to have the children sing it into their very souls, till it becomes a part of them." She strongly favours patriotic services in the churches on the Sunday preceding the 4th of July, when she would like to hear such airs as America, Hail Columbia, and the Star-Spangled Banner, and see the sacred edifices draped in red, white, and blue. Unheralded benefactions. Miss Gould has a strong prejudice against letting her many gifts and charities be known, and even her dearest friends never know what Helen's doing now. Of course, her great public charities, as when she gives $100,000 at a time, are heralded. Her recent gift of that sum to the government for national defence has made her name beloved throughout the land, but had she been able, she would have kept that secret also. The place Helen Gould now holds in the love and esteem of the Republic exemplifies how quickly the nation's heart responds to the touch of gentleness, and how easy it is for wealth to conquer and rise triumphant, if only it be seasoned with common sense and sympathy. I will not attempt to specify the numerous projects of charity that have been given life and vigour by Miss Gould. I know her gifts in recent years have passed the $1 million mark. "It seems so easy to do things for others," said Miss Gould recently. "It is easy to do good if the doing is natural and without thought of self-glorification." Miss Gould's views upon how to make the most of wealth are well set forth in her admirable letter to Dr. Louis Klopsch, as published in the Christian Herald. The Christian idea that wealth is a stewardship or trust, and not to be used for one's personal pleasure only, but for the welfare of others, certainly seems the noblest, and those who have more money or broader culture owe a debt to those who have had fewer opportunities. And there are so many ways one can help. Children, the sick, and the aged especially, have claims on our attention, and the forms of work for them are numerous, from kindergartens, day nurseries, and industrial schools, to homes and hospitals. Our institutions for higher education require gifts in order to do their best work, for the tuition fees do not cover the expense of the advantages offered. And certainly such societies as those in our churches, and the Young Women's Christian Association, and the Young Men's Christian Association, deserve our hearty cooperation. The earnest workers who so nobly and lovingly give their lives to promote the welfare of others, give far more than though they had simply made gifts of money, so those who cannot afford to give largely need not feel discouraged on that account. After all, sympathy and goodwill may be a greater force than wealth, and we can all extend to others a kindly feeling and courteous consideration that will make life sweeter and better. Sometimes it seems to me we do not sufficiently realize the good that is done by money that is used in the different industries in giving employment to great numbers of people under the direction of clever men and women, and surely it takes more ability, perseverance, and time to successfully manage such an enterprise than to merely make gifts. Her personality. Miss Gould's life at Tarrytown is an ideal one. She runs down to the city at frequent intervals to attend to business affairs, but she lives at Lyndhurst. She entertains but few visitors, and in turn visits but seldom. The management of her property, to which she gives close attention, makes no inconsiderable call upon her time. "I have no time for society," she said, "and indeed I do not care for it at all. It is very well for those who like it." Would you have an idea of her personality? "If so," replies Landis, "you will think of a good young woman in your own town, who loves her parents and her home, who is devoted to the church, who thinks of the poor on Thanksgiving Day and Christmas, whose face is bright and manner unaffected, whose dress is elegant in its simplicity, who takes an interest in all things, from politics to religion, whom children love and day labourers greet by reverently lifting the hat, and who, if she were graduated from a home seminary or college, would receive a bouquet from every boy in town. If you can think of such a young woman, and nearly every community has one, and 99 times out of 100 she is poor, you have a fair idea of the impression made on a plain man from a country town by Miss Gould. Helen Miller Gould is just at the threshold of her beautiful career. What a promise is there in her life and work for the coming century? She has pledged a hall of fame for the campus of the New York University, overlooking the Harlem River. It will have tablets for the names of 50 distinguished Americans, and proud will be the descendants of those whose names are inscribed thereon. The human heart is the tablet upon which Miss Gould has inscribed her name, and her Hall of Fame is as broad and high as the Republic itself. End of section 3.
Chapter 4 of How They Succeeded. How They Succeeded by Orison Swett Marden, Philip D. Armour's Business Career. I met Mr. Armour in the quiet of the Armour Institute, his great philanthropic school for young men and women. He was very courteous, and there was no delay. He took my hand with a firm grasp, reading with his steady gaze such of my characteristics as interested him, and saying at the same time, "Well, sir," in stating my desire to learn such lessons from his business career as might be helpful to young men, I inquired whether the average American boy of today has equally as good a chance to succeed in the world as he had when he began life. "Every bit and better. The affairs of life are larger. There are greater things to do. There was never before such a demand for able men." Were the conditions surrounding your youth especially difficult? No, they were those common to every small New York town in 1832. I was born in Stockbridge in Madison County. Our family had its roots in Scotland. My father's ancestors were the Robertsons, Watsons, and McGregors of Scotland. My mother came of the Puritans who settled in Connecticut. Dr. Gunsaulus says, I ventured, that all these streams of heredity set towards business affairs. Oh, perhaps so. I like trading well. My father was reasonably prosperous and independent for those times. My mother had been a schoolteacher. There were 6 boys, and of course such a household had to be managed with the strictest economy in those days. My mother thought it her duty to bring to our home some of the rigid discipline of the schoolroom. We were all trained to work together, and everything was done as systematically as possible. Had you access to any books? Yes, the Bible, Pilgrim's Progress, and a history of the United States. It is said of the latter by those closest to Mr. Armour that it was as full of shouting Americanism as anything ever written, and that Mr. Armour's whole nature is yet colored by its stout American prejudices. Also, that it was read and reread by the Armour children, though of this the great merchant did not speak. "Were you always of a robust constitution?" I asked. "Yes, sir. All our boys were. We were stout enough to be bathed in an ice-cold spring, out of doors when at home. There were no bathtubs and warm water arrangements in those days. We had to be strong. My father was a stern Scotchman, and when he laid his plans, they were carried out. When he set us boys to work, we worked. It was our mother who insisted on keeping us all at school, and who looked after our educational needs, while our father saw to it that we had plenty of good hard work on the farm." "How did you enjoy that sort of life?" I asked. "Well enough, but not much more than any boy does. Boys are always more or less afraid of hard work." The truth is, I have heard, but not from Mr. Armour, that when he attended the district school he was as full of pranks and capers as the best, and that he traded jackknives in summer and bobsleds in winter. Young Armour was often to be found in the winter coasting down the long hill near the schoolhouse. Later, he had a brief term of schooling at the Cazenovia Seminary. Footing it to California. "When did you leave the farm for a mercantile life?" I asked. "I was a clerk in a store in Stockbridge for 2 years, after I was 17, but was engaged with a farm, more or less, and wanted to get out of that life. I was a little over 17 years old when the California gold excitement of 1849 reached our town. Wonderful tales were told of gold already found, and the prospects for more on the Pacific coast. I brooded over the difference between tossing hay in the hot sun and digging up gold by handfuls, until one day I threw down my pitchfork and went over to the house and told Mother that I had quit that kind of work." People with plenty of money could sail around Cape Horn in those days, but I had no money to spare, and so decided to walk across the country. That is, we were carried part of the way by rail and walked the rest. I persuaded one of the neighbor boys, Calvin Gilbert, to go along with me, and we started. I provided myself with an old carpet sack into which to put my clothes. I bought a new pair of boots, and when we had gone as far as we could on canals and wagons, I bought 2 oxen. With these we managed for a while, but eventually reached California afoot. Young Armour suffered a severe illness on the journey, and was nursed by his companion Gilbert, who gathered herbs and steeped them for his friend's use, and once rode 30 miles in the rain to get a doctor. When they reached California, he fell in with Edward Crochan, a miner, who nursed him back to health. The manner in which he remembered these men gives keen satisfaction to the friends of the great merchant. Did you have any money when you arrived at the gold fields? Scarcely any. I struck right out, though, and found a place where I could dig, and I struck pay dirt in a little time. Did you work entirely alone? No, it was not long before I met Mr. Crochan at a little mining camp called Virginia. He had the next claim to mine, and we became partners. After a little while he went away, but came back in a year. We then bought in together. The way we ran things was turnabout. Crochan would cook one week and I the next, and then we would have a clean-up every Sunday morning. We baked our own bread and kept a few hens, which kept us supplied with eggs. There was a man named Chapin, who had a little store in the village, and he would take our gold dust there and trade it for groceries. The ditch. Did you discover much gold? I asked. Oh, I worked with pretty good success. Oh, nothing startling. I didn't waste much, and tried to live carefully. I also studied the business opportunities around, and persuaded some of my friends to join me in buying and developing a ditch, a kind of aqueduct to convey water to diggers and washers. That proved more profitable than digging for gold, and at the end of the year the others sold out to me, took their earnings and went home. I stayed and bought up several other water powers, until in 1856 I thought I had enough, and so I sold out and came east. How much had you made altogether? About $4,000. This was when Mr. Armour was 24 years old, his capital for beginning to do business. He enters the grain market. Did you return to Stockbridge? A little while, but my ambition set in another direction. I had been studying the methods then used for moving the vast and growing food products of the West, such as grain and cattle, and I believed that I could improve them and make money. The idea and the field interested me, and I decided to enter it. My standing was good, and I raised the money and bought what was then the largest elevator in Milwaukee. This put me in contact with the movement of grain. At that time, John Plankington had been established in Milwaukee a number of years, and in partnership with Frederick Layton had built up a good pork-packing concern. I bought in with those gentlemen, and so came in contact with the work I liked. One of my brothers, Herman, had established himself in Chicago some time before in the grain commission business. I got him to turn that over to the care of another brother, Joseph, so that he might go to New York as a member of the new firm of which I was a partner. It was important that the Milwaukee and Chicago houses should be able to ship to a house of their own in New York, that is, to themselves. Risks were avoided in this way, and we were certain of obtaining all that the ever-changing markets could offer us. When did you begin to build up your Chicago interests? They were really begun before the war by my brother Herman. When he went to New York for us, we began adding a small packing house to the Chicago Commission branch. It gradually grew with the growth of the West. Mr. Armour's acute perception of the commercial conditions for building up a great business. Is there any one thing that accounts for the immense growth of the packing industry here? I asked. System and the growth of the West did it. Things were changing at startling rates in those days. The West was growing fast. Its great areas of production offered good profits to men who would handle and ship the products. Railway lines were reaching out in new directions, or increasing their capacities and lowering their rates of transportation. These changes and the growth of the country made the creation of a food gathering and delivering system necessary. Other things helped. At that time, 1863, a great many could see that the war was going to terminate favorably for the Union. Farming operations had been enlarged by the war demand and war prices. The state banking system had been done away with, and we had a uniform currency available everywhere, so that exchanges between the East and the West had become greatly simplified. Nothing more was needed than a steady watchfulness of the markets by competent men in continuous telegraphic communication with each other, and who knew the legitimate demand and supply in order to sell all products quickly and with profit. System and good measure. Do you believe that system does so much? I ventured. System and good measure. Give a measure heaped full and running over, and success is certain. That is what it means to be the intelligent servants of a great public need. We believed in thoughtfully adopting every attainable improvement, mechanical or otherwise, in the methods and appliances for handling every pound of grain or flesh. Right liberality and right economy will do everything when a public need is being served. Then, too, our methods improved all the time. There was a time when many parts of cattle were wasted, and the health of the city injured by the refuse. Now, by adopting the best known methods, nothing is wasted. And buttons, fertilizers, glue, and other things are made cheaper and better for the world in general. Out of material that was before a waste and a menace, I believe in finding out the truth about all things, the very latest truth or discovery, and applying it. You attribute nothing to good fortune? Nothing. Certainly the word came well from a man whose energy, integrity, and business ability made more money out of a ditch than other men were making out of rich placers in the gold region. The turning point. May I ask what you consider the turning point of your career? The time when I began to save the money I earned at the gold fields. Truth. What trait do you consider most essential in young men? Truth. Let them get that. Young men talk about getting capital to work with. Let them get truth on board and capital follows. It's easy enough to get that. A great orator and a great charity. Did you always desire to follow a commercial rather than a professional life? Oh, not always. I have no talent in any other direction, but I should have liked to be a great orator. Mr. Armour would say no more on this subject, but his admiration for oratory has been demonstrated in a remarkable way. It was after a Sunday morning discourse by the splendid orator, Dr. Gunsaulus, at Plymouth Church, Chicago, in which the latter had set forth his views on the subject of educating children, that Mr. Armour came forward and said, "You believe in those ideas of yours, do you?" "Oh, I certainly do," said Dr. Gunsaulus. "And would you carry them out if you had the opportunity?" "I would." "Well, sir, said Mr. Armour. "If you will give me 5 years of your time, I will give you the money." "But to carry out my ideas would take $1 million, exclaimed Guncellus. "I have made a little money in my time," returned Mr. Armour, and so the famous Armour Institute of Technology, to which its founder has already given sums aggregating $2,800,000, was associated with Mr. Armour's love of oratory. One of his lieutenants says that Gerrit Smith, the old abolitionist, was Armour's boyhood's hero, and that today Mr. Armour will go far to hear a good speaker, often remarking that he would have preferred to be a great orator rather than a great capitalist. Ease in his work. "There is no need to ask you," I continued, "whether you believe in constant hard labor." "I should not call it hard. I believe in close application, of course, while laboring. Overwork is not necessary to success. Every man should have plenty of rest. I have." "You must rise early to be at your office at 7:30. "Yes, but I go to bed early. I am not burning the candle at both ends." The enormous energy of this man, who is too modest to discuss it, is displayed in the most normal manner. Though he sits all day at a desk which has direct cable connection with London, Liverpool, Calcutta, and other great centers of trade, with which he is in constant connection, though he has at his hand long-distance telephone connection with New York, New Orleans, and San Francisco, and direct wires from his room to almost all parts of the world, conveying messages in short sentences upon subjects which involve the moving of vast amounts of stock and cereals, and the exchange of millions in money, he is not seemingly an overworked man. The great subjects to which he gives calm, undivided attention from early morning until evening are laid aside with the ease with which one doffs his raiment, and outside of his office the cares weigh upon him no more. His mind takes up new and simpler things. "What do you do," I inquired, "after your hard day's work? Think about it?" "Oh, not at all. I drive, take up home subjects, and never think of the office until I return to it." "Your sleep is never disturbed?" "Not at all." A business king. And yet the business which this man forgets when he gathers children about him and moves in his simple home circle, amounts in 1 year to over $100 million worth of food products manufactured and distributed. The hogs killed, 1,750,000, the cattle, 1,080,000, the sheep, 625,000. 11,000 men are constantly employed, and the wages paid them are over $5,500,000. The railway cars owned and moving about all parts of the country, 4,000. The wagons of many kinds and of large number, drawn by 750 horses. The glue factory, employing 750 hands, makes over 12 million pounds of glue. In his private office, it is he who takes care of all the general affairs of this immense world of industry. And yet, at 4:30, he is done, and the whole subject is comfortably off his mind. Training youth for business. Do you believe in inherited abilities, or that any boy can be taught and trained and made a great and able man? I recognize inherited ability. Some people have it, and only in a certain direction. But I think men can be taught and trained so that they become much better and more useful than they would be otherwise. Some boys require more training and teaching than others. There is prosperity for everyone according to his ability. What would you do with those who are naturally less competent than others? Train them, and give them work according to their ability. I believe that life is all right, and that this difference which nature makes is all right. Everything is good, and is coming out satisfactorily, and we ought to make the most of conditions, and try to use and improve everything. The work needed is here, and everyone should set about doing it. When asked if he thought the chances for young men as good today as they were when he was young, "Yes," he said, "I think so. The world is changing every day, and new fields are constantly opening. We have new ideas, new inventions, new methods of manufacture, and new ways today everywhere. There is plenty of room for any man who can do anything well. The electrical field is a wonderful one. There are other things equally good, and the right man is never at a loss for an opportunity, provided he has some ability and good sense to start with, is thrifty, honest, and economical. There is no reason why any young man should not accumulate money and attain so-called success in life." When asked to what qualities he attributed his own success, Mr. Armour said, "I think that thrift and economy had much to do with it. I owe much to my mother's training and to a good line of Scotch ancestors, who have always been thrifty and economical. As to my business education, I never had any. I am, in fact, a good deal like Topsy. I just growed. My success has been largely a matter of organization. I have always made it a point to surround myself with good men. I take them when they are young and keep them just as long as I can. Nearly all of the men I now have grown up with me. Many of them have worked with me for 20 years. They have started in at low wages and have been advanced until they have reached the highest positions." Mr. Armour thinks that most men who accumulate a large amount of money inherited the money-making instinct. The power of making and accumulating money, he says, is as much a natural gift as are those of a singer or an artist. "The germs of the power to make money must be in the mind. Take, for instance, the people we have working with us. I get millions of good bookkeepers or accountants, but not more than 1 out of 500 in all of those I have employed has made a great success as an organizer or trader." Mr. Armour is a great believer in young men and young brains. He never discharges a man if he can possibly avoid it. If the man is not doing good work where he is, he puts him in some other department, but never discharges him if he can find him other work. He will not, however, tolerate intemperance, laziness, or getting into debt. Some time ago, a policeman entered his office. In answer to Mr. Armour's question, "What do you want here?" he replied, "I want to garnish one of your men's wages for debt." "Oh, indeed," said Mr. Armour. "And who is the man?" Asking the officer into his private room, he sent for the debtor. "How long have you been in debt?" asked Mr. Armour. The clerk replied that he had been behind for 20 years and could not seem to catch up. "But you get a good salary, don't you?" "Yes, but I can't get out of debt." "But you must get out, or you must leave here," said Mr. Armour. "How much do you owe?" The clerk then gave the amount, which was less than $1,000. "Well," said Mr. Armour, handing him a check, "there is enough to pay all your debts, and if I hear of you again getting into debt, you will have to leave." The clerk paid his debts and remodeled his life on a cash basis. Prompt to act. In illustration of Mr. Armour's aptitude for doing business and his energy, it is related that when, in 1893, local forces planned to defeat him in the grain market, and everyone was crying that at last the great Goliath had met his David, he was all energy. He had ordered immense quantities of wheat. The opposition had shrewdly secured every available place of storage, and rejoiced that the great packer, having no place to store his property, would suffer immense loss and must capitulate. He foresaw the fray and its dangers, and going over on Goose Island, bought property at any price and began the construction of immense elevators. The town was placarded with the truth that anyone could get work at Armour's elevators. No one believed they could be done in time, but 3 shifts of men, working night and day, often under the direct supervision of the millionaire, gradually forced the work ahead, and when, on the appointed day, the great grain ships began to arrive, the opposition realized failure. The vessels began to pour the contents of their immense holds into these granaries, and the fight was over. Foresight. The foresight that sent him to New York in 1864 to sell pork brought him back from Europe in 1893, months before the impending panic was dreamed of by other merchants. It is told of him that he called all his head men to New York and announced to them, "Gentlemen, there's going to be financial trouble soon." "Why, Mr. Armour?" they asked. "You must be mistaken. Things were never better. You have been ill and are suddenly apprehensive." "Oh, no," he said, "I'm not. There is going to be trouble." And he gave as his reasons certain conditions which existed in nearly all countries, which none of those present had thought of. "Now," said he to the first of his many lieutenants, "how much will you need to run your department until next year?" The head man named his need. The others were asked, each in turn, the same question, and when all were through he counted up and, turning to the company, said, "Gentlemen, go back and borrow all you need in Chicago on my credit. Use my name for all it will bring in the way of loans." Forearmed against panic. The lieutenants returned, and the name of Armour was strained to its utmost limit. When all had been borrowed, the financial flurry suddenly loomed up. But it did not worry the great packer, and his vaults were $8 million in gold. All who had loaned him at interest then hurried to his doors, fearing that he also was imperiled. They found him supplied with ready money, and able to compel them to wait until the stipulated time of payment, or to force them to abandon their claims of interest for their money, and so tide him over the unhappy period. It was a master stroke, and made the name of the great packer a power in the world of finance. Some secrets of success. Do you consider your financial decisions which you make quickly to be brilliant intuitions? I asked. "I never did anything worth doing by accident, nor did anything I have come that way. No, I never decide anything without knowing the conditions of the market, and never begin unless satisfied concerning the conclusion." "Not everyone could do that," I said. "I cannot do everything. Every man can do something, and there's plenty to do. Never more than now. The problems to be solved are greater now than ever before. Never was there more need of able men. I am looking for trained men all the time. More money is being offered for them everywhere than formerly." Do you consider that happiness consists in labor alone? "It consists in doing something for others. If you give the world better material, better measure, better opportunities for living respectably, there is happiness in that. You cannot give the world anything without labor, and there is no satisfaction in anything but such labor as looks toward doing this and does it. End of chapter 4.